Hi, this is Rob Skiff. I'm with Higher Ed Revolution this afternoon, and we're doing another in our series of interviews. This one is with Laura H. Gilbert, who is the author of Our Plan, A Family-Centered Approach to Paying for College. She's a frequent blogger, speaker, and consultant on higher ed, and she's also the author of How to Save $50,000 on College, Graduate School on a Budget, and Back to School for Grownups. And each work is written in her signature coach at your side style, offering common sense tips from her perspective as a professor, coach, and parent. Laura, thank you very, very much for agreeing to do this interview. Your book, Our Plan, is amazing. I really appreciate you sending me a Kindle copy, and it's an amazing guide to helping students work through thinking about college finances and how to pay for college from a very different perspective. Can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to write it and your experiences with writing that book?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me today. The first book that I wrote, as you mentioned, was Back to School for Grownups. And I wrote that when so many adults were going back around 2008, 2009. And I had gone back, as you'd mentioned, I'd gone back to school as an adult learner a number of years ago, and then moved into the HR field and did consulting. And people just started asking me a lot of questions about how do you make this happen as an adult. At the same time, I was a single mom with 4 kids, put them through school. So people started asking me, how do you do that too? How do you get your kids to and through school? And so I've been working on these issues since the mid 90s for sure. And what I noticed a few years ago, around 2008, 2009, is that up to that time, all the questions that I'd been getting were about how to get to and through college and into the careers that you wanted. And so all of my efforts, presentations and coaching, all of that were around those 3 topics: getting to school, getting through school, and getting into the career that you wanted. But suddenly all of the questions that were coming to me changed. And the one question that was presented from many different angles, but it was the one question, was how do we get more money? Suddenly people had lost track of what their ultimate goal was, what that life was that they were looking for on the other side, what they wanted college to do for them. Suddenly everybody seemed to just be focused on how to get more money to go. And as I started to really see that and recognize that shift, I also started to see people making errors along the way that were costing them far more money than they needed to. So a whole bunch of things were happening. The cost of college tuition was going up. There were all of these articles that we were reading in the news or just everywhere saying you have to go to college. Businesses more and more were saying we only want people that have some sort of a post-secondary degree. So there was all of this pressure and this panic setting in. And teaching, and as a parent and just as a coach and all of that, I kept, again, seeing people make mistakes that they didn't need to make. So I never intended to write this last book, but about 3 years ago, I just felt like I had to. It's like I had to put down in writing somewhere a plan that people could look at, just an option, an opportunity for people to sort of get off the panic and the fear bandwagon. Yes, we've got this huge crisis in higher ed, but I believe that people don't have to succumb to it. And there are different ways that each person can use to do that. So that's how I ended up writing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the problem that you've had a little bit with the publishing?
There have been some different entities. I don't know who it is. Almost looks international because there's a little bit of broken English in the descriptions, but that have made free downloads available of the book, and I have so far found 4 of them.
Yeah, so a great deal. I know I'm selling my own book, which is made out of which was my dissertation, on Amazon.
Awesome.
And so it's a great way to just, earn a little extra money. So please go out and buy the book, but buy it from Kindle. don't Google it, because
Thank
you
you.
may get somebody maybe giving money to someone else besides the author. So let's talk a little bit more about. I mean, that means that, if you were headed back in 2005,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and you were going back to get your JD, okay, to law school, which is not an inexpensive proposition, and you
Mm-hmm.
were also putting how many family members through college at the same time, and you were also a single mom and working yourself.
I think the most that I had in school at once was three. They all have been graduated for a while. My last one, well, I've got one that's now taking a break from his PhD. Otherwise, the last one that finished his master's was a couple of years ago. So, but the four finished all their undergrads by 2002. So that's been a while. That has been a while.
Now,
So
and it's,
actually, I went, sorry to interrupt. I went
no, go
back to
ahead.
law school. I went back to law school the year after my youngest one finished his BA. It was my turn.
Got
So,
it. Okay, but you had already had a PhD. You already had a PhD.
yes.
So your
Yep.
family clearly likes you guys spend your disposable income not on Mercedes Benzes. You guys are
Right.
spending it on your brain power and on education.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Um, so tell me a little bit about how we had Kryn on uh, 2 weeks ago talking
Hmm.
about why the sort of the structures that are making higher ed um, increase its level of debt and cost.
Hmm.
And you also talk a little bit about that, a lot less though. What do you think um, are the factors that are really driving up the cost in higher ed when you take a look at it? You talk a little bit about the different benefits that the financial institutions and also actually the U.S. government is having with it. Can you walk us through a little bit of that? Who's making the money?
Well, I think that there are a lot of different entities making money. My approach is really I tend to I spent a year trying to run down that path and answer that question, and because I figured if I could answer that question, then I could identify where the issue was, and then I could work on fixing that, on thinking about how can we fix that. Not that I can fix it, but that I could, as a policy analyst, I could start working on that. And that's when I realized that it's way too big. It's got too many pieces. So I try to talk about that just a tiny bit at the beginning of the book. And I think one of the core issues is that there are so many, but one of the core issues is that things have fundamentally changed in the last 20, 25 years. And so the premise for um, for a lot of education is different than it was back even in the 90s, because in the 90s, if you went to college, first of all, if you went to college and got a bachelor's degree and you went to let's say you went to Yale and somebody else went to Mankato State College in Minnesota. Is there a difference? Absolutely. Is there a significant, huge, major difference in that degree and what you come out with? Not, I would say, not as much as we kind of thought back then, especially when you compare now to many of the colleges that have such that are just have they're just egregious in terms of quality. So where the quality was maybe this big, the differential was maybe this big 20 years ago. The quality differential now is tremendous, and so you've got all sorts of people um, going to get that degree because there's all of this fear and this we must have and uh, pressure from all sides to earn these credentials. But at the same time, there are so many things happening that are affecting the quality of the diploma, that whereas 20 years ago, and sorry, I know I'm kind of scattered, but that's kind of how this thing is. It's like I almost need a whiteboard to talk. um, but anyway, 20 years ago, you could go and you could get a degree just about anywhere. And you knew that when you had that degree, and it could be in just about any topic, and you could get a job. You could get a job that paid a living wage.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about this, the differentiation in the quality. Okay.
Yes.
Because we used to buy by brand. Okay?
Yes.
We used
Totally.
to buy, hey, if I went to Middlebury, or I went to Yale or Bowdoin or Stanford, or McAllister, great school in Minnesota, that meant something. Now, does it? I mean, for most of us, we're not going to be going to those institutions. Does it really mean anything anymore? Except for that very small percentage of people who go there, okay? Does it really make a difference? What's your sense?
I think that as far as where you end up with the job, that I think one of the things, clearly the academics at a lot of those places are really superior. A lot of the Ivy Leagues, they're just
sure, but they're going to be because they cost more. I mean, the Mercedes-Benz is a neat car. Okay,
yes.
I don't want to use a Mercedes-Benz all the time. Okay, I want to use a Subaru, a Volvo, a Ford will work just as well. That would kind of be the point. And you hint a bit at that. What's the purpose of your spending the money? What's your long-term goal? And does the cost really match what you're going to be making at the end when you graduate?
Yeah. And I would say not even just the cost, but the whole thing. Like I love your analogy there. One that I used recently at a presentation I did with a group of high school students and their parents was I said, you already know how to do the kind of shopping that you need to do for college. And I said, let's say you want to buy footwear. What's the first thing you need to know? And at first there's silence, and then somebody, eventually will say, what size, or what is this a boot, or is this a dress shoe for the prom? And so that's the first step. I think the first step where the first step used to be, go to the best college you can get into. Don't worry about the money because you'll make it all back later. And that formula used to work.
Yep.
It's gone. Exactly. It worked until the mid 1990s, and maybe even for a few years after that. But a lot of today's parents went to school themselves in the 80s and 90s, and they're still using that model. They're thinking that model still exists. It doesn't. It might in like you said, in some rare circumstances, but that's not the risk formula that you can use anymore. To me, the first question in deciding that whole investment risk cost benefit formula is, what do you want the college to do? What do you want your college education to do for you? Do you need that Bentley, to go buy milk? Maybe not.
My youngest son is 10. And once I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Are you?
Oh, just now, yeah.
Okay, I think maybe your microphone was too close to the to the speaker. My youngest son is 10, and he wants to be a prosecuting attorney. Okay, he's got that in his mind, and he said, well, I kind of want to be a federal judge, and he said, so that means I've got to go to a really expensive elite undergraduate institution, and then I need to go into Yale or Harvard law school. Okay, so there are a few of these professions where it's true, you probably have to go to those elite schools. But for a vast majority, or if you want a job on Wall Street, for example, and become part of that good old boy, good old girl network, there are certain schools that act as feeders to that. But if you want to do anything more productive in your life, there are tons of other options for you, and you want to pick the one that is going to be the most cost effective and not have you end up in debt. Now, the debt piece, the student loan debt, which you really concentrate on in the book, how has that changed over the past 20 years?
Um, One of the things that's changed that, and this will probably be a universally unpopular statement, but I
That's
think
okay. We make them all the time here.
one of the things that I've really seen happen um, is a shift in the expectations of parents and the expectations of students. And here's a story. I was on a parent committee at my youngest son's college, and it happened to be he graduated in 2002, and I remember going out for an event and having the president and the I think it was the head of admissions say something had shifted. That literally that year, and they had talked to people at other these were small liberal arts colleges, small liberal arts colleges across the country, and they had noticed a shift at that time too. That whereas up until that time, if students would figure out things to do on the weekend, like, I don't know, study, or if they wanted entertainment, they would be more creative. But suddenly in 2002, parents started demanding more high quality dorms, more variety in food, the sports facilities. And at the same time, what I started hearing, and then I experienced in when I was teaching, and I've taught at two different institutions as an adjunct, is the pressure from parents, which I would have never thought to call a college for my student, but the pressure to give the students A's and B's, or the concept that, well, if I don't get an A or B, I'll just take the class again. And from about 2002, 2004, around in there, up through now, what I see a lot is people taking the same class multiple times, taking out more and more loans, borrowing money to do all sorts of things, whether it's to buy a car, to buy things for their home. I read in
So the growth, the growth of, you talked about on, I don't have the page number, but it's location 187 in the Kindle.
Mhm.
You talked about how it used to be that affordability was cash. Okay,
Right,
that people would pay for something in cash, and of course the cost was smaller.
right,
Okay, was lower. But now what we have is affordability is now whether you can make the credit payments. So the
right.
loan
That's
payments. So there's a
exactly.
switching, like Pickney
Yes.
Pickney in his book, The Capitalist. I can't remember the name of the title, but we'll just say
Yeah.
Pickney, Thomas Pickney,
Yes.
the famous
Yes.
book
Yes.
from 2 years ago. Um,
Yes.
Talks about how we're transforming people from becoming actually owners of capital, of their own capital, to actually
Yes.
becoming debt indentured servants or
Yes.
renters. What
Yes.
I would actually call sort of, what is interest, but a type of debt slavery, because you're working and it's going to another entity involuntarily, especially with
Right.
the case of student loan debt. So that switch from that, making from the idea that everybody needed to accumulate capital and then they could deploy that capital and kept the costs down. We now
Mm-hmm.
have so much debt. I mean, even amongst friends, and the children of friends, people don't think of having a lot of savings. They think of, what can I make that payment?
Exactly. Exactly. Payments that are affordable,
Yeah,
without thinking about the long term cost of these things. And to me, that is the blame for that is all over the place. It's sort of a shift in society about well, I deserve, well, yes, you deserve the Bentley, I deserve whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's the best choice.
Laura,
Uh,
I would say that the blame can squarely be placed actually on low interest rate policies, which make debt kind of affordable. Like the Federal Reserve has
yeah.
had low interest payments,
Mhm.
low interest rates, since, it's been lowering its interest rate since the Reagan administration. And, you know, around after, you know, the Greenspan's put and the bubble,
Right.
okay, and now interest rates, I mean, no one knows what to do with, you know, 12%, 15% interest rates. Mortgages, I mean, it wasn't too long ago that a mortgage rate was, you know, 15, 20%.
Yep. Yep.
But
Really
no one under the age of 40
Right.
or, you know, 47, no one who's purchased a home remembers those times at all. And with the
Right.
student loan debt, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the rates are still really, really low when you think about it, but
Yeah.
they trick people a little bit because they don't add that 6 or 7%, which you mentioned in a couple of different places of, you know, when you're taking out that loan from college, and can you talk about how do people really calculate the real cost?
Mm-hmm.
Or do they even think about it?
No, and the numbers, the data that's out there is kind of uh, incomplete. That's the kind word. It's very incomplete right now. And I know there are a lot of entities that are working on trying to get better data. So that will be good once that happens. But I think one of the challenges with even understanding for people to even get their arms around this debt is that unlike consumer loans, car loans, sorts of things, or unlike mortgage loans, worst case scenario, you can file bankruptcy, it goes away, the bank comes, they take your house, they take your car, but then 7 years go by or whatever, and then you start over. It's bad, it's nasty, but you can start, you get no do-over here. And it does
No,
not.
yep. No, the
And,
consumer debt can be discharged, but
right.
this is the debt carry forever.
Right. And the other
There's no
challenge,
getting out of it.
right. And the other challenge that it's really hard, my big campaign is awareness. It's like there are other people like Corinne who are doing really, really good work to help people see a lot of the severity of a lot of these issues. And so I'm really choosing my campaign to be about awareness. Let's bring let's get everything out on the table so then people can at least make educated decisions or make choices. And I think that so another one of the challenges with student loans, if you take out a mortgage and then you take out a second mortgage, they're kind of the same instrument. I mean, if I was the bankers that may or may not be listening would say, no, they're different. Well, they're different. They're not as different as a federal student loan, a private student loan, a private loan that's used for education, credit cards that are used to pay for something at the college that's related to that, or more and more what I'm hearing about is personal loans. And that it used to be more of friends and family, Uncle Bob lends you $5,000, but what I'm hearing more and more, and even a couple of weeks ago, this is how it works. Somebody who I was talking to said, oh yes, my mother's friend, my elderly mother's friend has a neighbor whose daughter is in college. She needed $10,000. And so the other elderly woman said, oh, I met her once. She seems like a sweet girl. I'll lend it to her. So they draw up papers and there goes the $10,000. And maybe that's an awesome, wonderful, kind thing to do. But for me, and the thing that makes the big red flag for me is that is not addressing the initial issue about, is that $10,000 of value for this school and for what this wants?
Yep. There's the whole, like, will it pay off? There's also the ease in which the ease in which people are able, to get into this type of debt. The financial industry, the banks and the government isn't doing the kind of analysis where they would say, I'm sorry, you're not qualified for it. Instead, they're like, okay, go for it. You want to major in basket weaving or take out $100,000 loan to study. Now, I love this subject, ancient Javanese literature, okay, of which there are no jobs connected to it. Okay, sure, we'll lend you $100,000 to do that because we know that we now own you. Okay, we now own all of the work, the
Right.
interest payments that you are going to have to extract, and we'll get it from you one way or another.
Yeah.
For me, that's the sick thing with this because those instruments aren't designed to create capital to liberate you. They're designed, and especially the lack of transparency that you point
Right.
out to, in terms of how the college financial aid officers are operating. Okay, they're not telling you the true cost of servicing that debt over time. They're even in your book, you talk about the letters that people get when they receive financial aid awards.
Mm-hmm.
My God, I mean, like, I haven't received one. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. I think that's like blatant dishonesty. They're giving no real picture as to what the financial aid award is going to be, or what the or what the student is going to actually end up having to pay. So people like say, "Oh, I got into UVM. I got into
Right.
University of Madison, Wisconsin. Oh, I got into Yale. Oh, I'll sign on the dotted line. I got
Yes.
in. Yay!"
Yep.
Um,
And that
and
was the philosophy. And people, that
it
it
is,
worked.
yeah.
It used to work, and families were proud, and everybody was happy, and they thought they'd live happily ever after. And I just have to add, I actually feel sorry for many, many, many financial aid officers because, and I don't know the law, this is something I have not looked up, but I know that their hands are tied about a lot of the things they can say. One person I was talking to a year ago had somebody who was coming, and this is for graduate school, but still, came to the financial aid office to take out more loans, and she already had over
Yeah.
$200,000 in student loans, and she was now signing. She had just signed up for a master's. It wasn't as strong as a master's in social work. It was a master's in social organization. It was, three steps above basket weaving. It was something that maybe the teeniest, tiniest, there was a small possibility that she'd be employed, but not with 200. And then this financial aid officer said, gee, for her to get through this program at the same run rate for money that she had been using, she would end up with at least $250,000 in debt. Medical doctors are having a hard time paying back that kind of a debt. If you're looking at a job that you may or may not get, and if you get it, it pays $30,000 a year, you'll never pay that back.
No.
And the
Yep.
financial aid officer, by law, my understanding is that she couldn't say, you can't do this. She couldn't prevent that. And I've heard that from quite a few people. So that's something I need to look up. But
Yeah,
it's a
I've
funky
heard
system.
that I've heard that same thing a little bit about, you can't say you're not going to pay that back. But it's interesting that that law gets drawn up and created to
Yeah.
actually I mean, this is where I have to say that the system is almost designed to get people into debt servitude.
Yeah.
And indentured servants had a better deal, okay, than what we give students, because when you were indentured, it was only for 7 years, and you were
True.
guaranteed food, clothing, and shelter during your
There you go.
indenture. You're not guaranteed that at all, and it's not discharged after 7 years. It's
Oh, no.
it's it's
No.
worse. It's
Yeah.
worse.
Yes. And in fact, a lot of the data, sometimes when I looked at so much data in the last 15 years, 10, 15 years, that I tend to notice when I see something that looks a little odd. And so then I dig in to try to figure out what's going on. And one of the things that I discovered a couple of years ago is that a lot of the data that's being put out by really reputable sources, that will say the average student loan payment is whatever for an undergraduate degree. That's used to be based on 10-year repayments. Now it's based on 20-year repayments. So, but unless a family knows to ask or knows to check out, to do the math themselves, and there are all sorts of, there are places that you can go and do that just like that. But unless you know to even ask the question, you can get yourself in trouble really fast. I did an interesting calculation. I wasn't planning on it for today, but I was at work doing something else. And I thought, I'm going to check on some math. And I discovered one of my favorite sites that I like is Finaid or Finaid, Finaid. It was started by Mark Kantrowitz, who also felt very passionate about transparency a number of years ago. He has moved on, but it's like the ultimate nonprofit place to find out a lot of good information. And there are calculators on there. And they now have a calculator, the first one I've seen, that really breaks all the numbers down for the income-based repayment. So for examples, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but one of the responses to this high student debt that the government has come back with, which is, well, yay, but at the same time, what's going on? The income-based repayment, it used to be income contingent payment, but the repay program, and those are all being held up as, aren't these wonderful programs because your loan, and then it goes back to the monthly payment. It reduces your monthly payment so much.
Yeah, I find that whole idea of taking permanently someone's wages, part of their wages, okay? And you can call it voluntary, but for a lot of people, it's involuntary.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. It's serfdom. I mean, I'm using these words deliberately based on the definitions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it is making people back into serfs. It's making them it's an involuntary taking of a person's labor that they can never get out of. Okay. Which is by its very definition a type of slavery, according to, you just look at the Wikipedia, or you look at most definitions of slavery, which is involuntary taking of someone's labor and something that you can never get out of, and that is passed down to your children, okay? And and if the loans aren't paid off, your estate gets hit with them. Have you come across any cases where actually the children of people who have taken out student loans are actually liable for the payment of those loans?
No, I have not come across that, but you're right. If somebody dies and there are student loans, actually, if they're federal loans, the federal loans do go away in death.
Right.
So that's the one federal loans do. Private loans don't necessarily. Some banks are starting to sometimes, but federal loans do. What I'm seeing more is actually two things. On the opposite side is grandparents co-signing.
Yeah, the co-signing piece, you're on the hook for.
Yeah. So, for example, in 2013, 35,000 senior citizens had their Social Security checks garnished because of either loans they had co-signed for or their own loans. Maybe they'd gone back to school in their 50s and now they had all of this debt. But anyway, so there's that end of it. But this, I think that what you were saying about the serfdom and involuntary taking and all of that would be right on. The difference that I see, the main difference I see is that people do have choices. But the catch is you have to make that choice right at the beginning, because once you've signed on that line, now you're stuck. So that's why my whole focus has been on helping people, sort of raise the awareness that you don't have to go to the Ivy Leagues and you don't have to go to a private liberal arts college. That going to a private liberal arts college that's middle of the road does not necessarily mean that you're going to be a better human being than if you spent 2 years at a community college, or you did stuff in high school where you could maybe test out or take some college classes in high school. If you figured out a different way, there are ways to make it happen. You don't have to become that serf. You don't have to get stuck on this train. But the trick is you have to think about it ahead of time.
I'd really recommend that everybody buy the book, Our Plan. Okay, because that book, if you fill out if you follow the advice and the methodology in the book that Laura is talking about, you'll be making decisions about one of the most important investments that you'll ever make in your life, and one that has consequences for you, your children, your grandchildren. Okay, you'll be making it with your eyes wide open, and you'll make a much, much better decision.
And one of the things that I always say too is that I feel very strongly that every school is the right school for somebody. So there are
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of schools that are in the newspaper and having all sorts of lawsuits, and I think that a lot of them I feel very negatively about. But at the same time, some of the students who I've known that have gone to these places are people who, for one reason or another, could not get into a regular college, whether they're an international student whose English wasn't good enough for a typical college, or maybe there's somebody that has a criminal record that just could not get them into, and they're trying to get their life back on track. I've seen a number of people who have been able to take these, what I think of as really horrible colleges, but they've been able to use them as a place to start, and then sort of get some basics, and then move into someplace else and move on. So I really believe that every school is the right school for somebody, but the important thing is to make sure that the place that you're going is the right place for you and for that life that you want on the other side.
Laura, I mean, this system can't continue.
Right. Oh, no, it can't.
Um, and maybe we've hit the overshoot part, hopefully, and soon we'll hit the collapse. What do you think is going to, what are the catalysts that are going to, what are the catalysts that are going to lead to sort of the collapse of, traditional higher ed, the way we've been financing it, and the collapse of the system? Because your book points out there are so many different industries that are dependent upon this debt, this cheap capital. There's the financial industry. Okay. Yeah. There's actually the construction companies that build all of these big, huge, beautiful facilities. There are also the tenured faculty who are teaching not a whole lot of classes, but yet making, six-figure salaries, or, high five, six-figure salaries. There's the administrative bloat. Okay. What do you see things collapsing? Do you see breaking points starting to happen, or is it just going to continue until people just, we're all broke and everybody and the banks own everything?
I think that some of the things that I'm seeing, there was an article, I think it was in the Atlantic last week. The essence of the article was that half of the people who were surveyed in some survey that they did would not have $400 if they had an emergency today. They would not have access to $400. And the author was somebody who is, I think he's a senior editor for the magazine, and was talking about how he himself is somebody who is in this situation, even though he and his family from the outside look like they're upper middle class and all of this. And part of what he was talking about was the student loan crisis, that so many folks have taken out, middle class, upper middle class folks have not only have this huge debt there, but have bought the extra cars, or have bought the Bentleys, or maybe not the Bentleys, but the expensive cars and the expensive houses in the suburbs. And it's a completely different lifestyle that they've kind of grown into under this same sort of thought that it's not about, do I have the cash to buy this, but can I afford the monthly payment for this, without thinking, how long is that monthly payment going to go on? And I think as more and more, you see more and more articles about that sort of thing hitting, of people going, wait a minute, I worked 20 years and I've worked my butt off, but I don't have $400 if I have a crisis today. As more of that starts to hit, then I think people will start paying attention. And the other thing that I expect to really be a significant game changer really soon is, as so many folks that have this huge student debt now have kids who are starting to get to the college age, and the parents have nothing to help the kids out. But because the parents have decent jobs, many of them have really good jobs, they aren't going to qualify for so much need-based aid, but they've got their own student debt. I can't tell you how many people I know where between the two parents, they'll have $1,200, $1,500 in student loan payments a month. And a lot of times that's on some income-based or income contingent repayment. It's just that they have grown in their careers to be making so much money that now their payment is also higher. But at the same time, with their kids, they're not going to be able to pay for them to go to college. So once that pain hits and that reality hits, then I think we're going to start to see some things shift back.
Yeah, I would add, and people who've heard these interviews have heard me say it before a lot of different times. I think once we have the big Treasury bond debt crisis in the international markets and interest rates rise, to 10%, and you have a collapse in the value of the dollar because of this debt-fueled mania. When interest rates rise suddenly, the payments become unaffordable, and the access to the capital just isn't going to be there. And you're not going to be able to print money and just inflate it away. It's gone.
Right.
And
right.
You see now that the like you point out, and Corinne have pointed out, along with lots of other authors, is the Department of Education makes a tremendous amount of money for their budget off of student loan debt. And J.P. Morgan, one of the main servicers, makes a tremendous amount of money. You mentioned student loans in your book. It's the third biggest company on the planet, ExxonMobil and Apple, and student loan, Sallie Mae, Freddie Mae, and the privates. That's where the economic value is, and when those interest rates rise, there's no way that people are going to be able to afford those types of payment plans and those types of those monthly payment plans. It's going to be impossible, and that's when I think you'll see the collapse of the system. And I'm hoping it comes sooner rather than later.
And I think that one of the challenges is if there are the programs like the income-based, then if the interest is going up, but if your payment is based on your income, and I think it's like 10 or 15%, depending on the program, of your discretionary income that oftentimes is defined as 150% of the poverty guidelines for your family size, but whatever, then that pain isn't going to be there. But what people don't realize, I think of it as the long-term spending power, because if I borrow $10,000 from you and I pay you back tomorrow, I probably pay you $10,000, or maybe I pay you $10,500 because you were a nice guy to let me borrow it for, whatever. And if there's some interest rate, like with a car payment or something like that, a typical car payment, everybody sort of understands there's a little bit of interest. But with these long-term payments, if you've got a $30,000 student loan and you pay it over 10 years, you pay this much interest. But if it's spread out over 20 or 25 years, you're now paying every year interest on the interest.
Or your entire lifetime, up until you retire, with those income pieces. That and it'll be interesting. It really will create a society of two different classes of people. They're the indentured. 15% was the rate in which I think you had to give your feudal lord the harvest of your fields.
Oh, wow.
That there, if you go back to, medieval times, or even, the Japanese system where there were so many, I think it was kokyu of rice, pounds of rice, sacks of rice that you had to give, and a percentage of that. You're a serf. And you will never have the opportunity to accumulate capital or create a business or any type of freedom, right, that you would have had if you hadn't been placed in the situation where you had to take out that debt.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we're going to see too, one of the big things we're going to see is we really need the entrepreneurs to be bringing the economy back. And there are all sorts of, that's one of the, it seems to be, this is totally informal, but there seems entrepreneurial management majors seem to be one of the hot majors and the hot areas to study. And I think it's because we really need entrepreneurs. But entrepreneurs need capital, and they need the ability to have lean years while they're developing. But if you and your parents and your grandparents and everybody else has put all of the money into this, there's nothing left for that.
Yeah. Most companies get created initially through capital with friends and family. And
right.
I know that,
yeah.
you know, Oplerno, to talk about my own personal story, the only way that we're able to, you know, we've got a lot of stamina as we build, as we try to gain traction. The only way we've been able to do that is the fact that, you know, our run rate is so low. You know, and Daniel's got some, you know, great skill sets to make a living, but, you know, I don't have any debt per se, because of, you know, some good management and some luck, and that family can put in some money to invest in the potential of what Oplerno can do. Not everyone has that opportunity. So you find actually then that the wealth producers come from the same groups that have always had the benefit of being involved in the entrepreneurial piece, you know, white, European, upper middle class individuals, rather than an entrepreneurial piece which creates value being equally distributed amongst everyone, immigrants, etc. And if we go to that, you know, percentage-based debt service, it's going to be even worse, where just a thin sliver of people will be able to create the new companies and develop the new products. And we need everybody to be doing that, not just the people who lucked out to be born into a family of people who didn't have a lot of debt.
Yeah, I talked last year, I talked very briefly to a gentleman named John Hope Bryant, who's done a ton, particularly in the African-American community, but in other underrepresented communities also, with kids and money and the whole financial literacy thing. And one of the things that he talks about is, initially, it's not about figuring out how much more, and I know I'm going to misquote, but it's not about how much more money you can make, but initially it's about making better choices, making better decisions with what you have, that then will lead to this. And he's got camps and summer programs and all sorts of in the school programs one is called Entrepreneur in a Box, but it's all about helping kids learn basic financial literacy so that they can make good choices and become entrepreneurs, because that's where so much of the opportunity is. Another thing that I thought was really interesting, I just came back from a conference in DC. I've been in an education policy fellowship program for the last year, and there was there are 17 states that are involved in that. We all came together in Washington, DC a couple of weeks ago. And one of the presentations that I heard was from an African-American dean of a community college, and I forget what state. She was just incredible. And she said one of the challenges that they're having, that she sees in that community, is that folks that have been kind of on the outside for so long see that the small private liberal arts colleges and the name universities, if you go there, then you've made it. And so they're taking out more debt than they might need to if they, rather than coming to a community college for a couple of years and then moving to the small liberal arts college and graduating with that name. So she said even in her community, she was finding it a big challenge to help people understand that things had changed. Like when we started this conversation, that's
right.
what we're talking
I'll get
about.
a little slightly more radical in that, you know, if you look at capital accumulation post-World War II, a lot of it driven by the GI Bill.
Yes.
Okay? Yes. A lot of it also being driven by the fact that GIs could come back and they could purchase a home. Okay.
Yes.
And start getting capital. Well, African Americans and also Latinos, but predominantly African Americans in the South, were denied the two programs to create that type of capital, and that really, you know, isn't didn't create a fair system.
No.
And when you talk about the 20th century and the post-World War II generation, okay, that whole segment of the society, there are exceptions, okay, but that whole segment of the society systematically denied that piece. And now with the whole subprime mortgage issue,
Yep.
what little capital that accumulated, in a lot of those communities in the inner city or the new suburbs, Detroit, Chicago, were then harvested as the subprime mortgage crisis really allowed big banks to go in and steal from African American communities all over this country and Latino communities, people of color, and yet again a harvesting of capital by the big banks. And now the interesting thing, I think, is that those same tactics and strategies are now being used on everybody. Okay, and through that student loan, part of that is through that student loan piece. And I'm not a Marxist, but the Marxist critique of how just certain classes take from the working class, from the proletariat. Well, Karl was right. Okay, there's some really insidious stuff going on that prevents people from accumulating capital, forming businesses, taking chances, being in control of their own lives. And instead, you've got to make these monthly payments for an education that was, not that great to begin with. And your book, though, is a great antidote to avoiding that trap. So, we've talked a little bit over for an hour. Anything else you want to say before I'll give the final plug for the book?
I guess the last thing that I'd like to say is that sometimes people will ask me what I think is a comfortable amount of debt or a safe amount of debt. And what I say is for an undergraduate degree at a quality school, and I mean a quality school, and there are ways to define that.
Yep.
But really at a decent school for an undergraduate degree, between $30,000 and $35,000, you'll be okay. If you stick on a 10-year payment plan, that's about $320 a month. It's, a car payment, it's doable. And one of the reasons that I say the $30,000 to $35,000 is because you can get federal loans, which then do have different programs. They can, if you have problems with money or something happens, you can get them deferred. There are different programs. Also, the federal loans qualify for like the public service loan forgiveness programs. They qualify for a whole lot of different things, and that's about the maximum that you can take. Once you go over that amount, it means you're probably taking out private loans, and that's where things get really, really, really tricky. And I just think that if people can, when you start out, just know what you want the college to do for you, what you want that degree to do for you, and identify how much debt, just a ballpark, what works for you. To me, that's the most important number to have going in. I worked with a number of families this year, and even just seeing the high school seniors go, 25,000 or 40,000. I want to not graduate with any more than that. They've just got a number that's sticking in their heads. I just read recently that Indiana University has seen a significant drop in the amount of money that's borrowed since they have started a program where once a year they send students a letter that says, this is how much you've borrowed already, and this would be the monthly payments on these loans. And just that awareness piece is helping their students go, oh, maybe I want to do something different. Maybe I want to work more. Maybe I want to take a full load instead of only take 4 classes for the same price or whatever. But anyway, it's just that awareness.
Great. Well, again, everybody go out and buy the book. Okay. We have a link right here to the book. And it's make sure you buy it from Amazon.com. Don't Google it. Okay. It's Our Plan, a family-centered approach to paying for college. It's on Amazon.com. Please buy it. Work through the workbook and all of the different calculations in that, and really follow Dr. Gilbert's plan. She outlined it really, really clearly. Anyone can do it, whether it's your entire family or whether it's a single individual who is trying to put themselves through college, or whether you're a non-traditional student and you're thinking about going back. Anyone can follow that, because you really have to avoid debt as much as possible and get the smallest debt for the greatest amount of return that you're going to receive, which is called ROI, return on the investment. And that is important in education, because you can't go through life with a $250,000 of debt that is not dischargeable, that is permanent, and that makes you less than, totally changes your opportunities to start a business, buy a home, have a good marriage, or start a family, all those different things. So Dr. Gilbert, thank you very much for spending time with us, and I really appreciate all your knowledge with this, and we'll get in touch soon to get an update on how the book is doing.
Great. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that surprised me doing that kind of work is that some of the most conservative voices, to my mind, are from the students.
Doing is taking a look at, student loan debt and its relationship to financial aid and how financial aid gets calculated. Okay, the calculation.
There's young people for whom the whole deal that they've been offered just doesn't seem to be there anymore.
Is this idea of collective revolting, which Occupy Student Debt was calling for.